Well, it's at the top of the hour, but it looks like we only have Dave Robin and Michael Richardson on at this point. So we'll wait a little longer. And we have Francesca. I didn't mean that you didn't count, Francesca.
Hi, Barry.
Hi. Michael, you want to go ahead and get your slides up? You can do the share preloaded slides button and I'll approve it.
I should have put Karsten's name on this too.
We figure Karsten's name is there automatically, right? Good morning, Karsten, or good afternoon.
Good morning. Michael is pretty quiet, so if you want to adjust your microphone.
Let me
Yeah,
see.
yeah. Better.
That
Yeah,
better? I did
Yep.
nothing at all other than talk louder.
Good.
No, you sound the same as Karsten to me, so same volume.
Okay. Gain is at 100. Are we still waiting?
Well, let's see. We have Dave, Ira, Marco, yeah, Ricard, so Sean. Okay, I think we're ready to go. We have enough people to move ahead. So, um, welcome to CBOR. Who's willing to help take notes? Can we get a couple people to do that?
I can help or renew the habit.
Okay. All right. Well, it looks like you've got it. So go ahead and stick your name in so we can give you credit. And let's go ahead, Michael.
All right. So got some IESG reviews on this document that had passed working group last call a little while ago. And just to recall, this is what the tags look like, these three black ones, and maybe we're going to talk about the green one today. This is an IPv6 address. It's never truncated. This is a subnet. It can be truncated. And I can't remember if you can see my pointer or not. I think not, right? And then we have interface definition, which is a 128-bit address with a prefix length for how long is actually on link if it's an interface. And then there's v4 tags, and they don't matter because v4 doesn't matter. These are the review comments. How do we support link local scope? Or if we do, what kind of hex should we use? And should we avoid any kind of dead memory, sanitized memory codes there? What to do with invalid lengths and what to do with Ethernet addresses? So I think I just put them in the order of low-hanging fruit first. So you can see in this example, we have upper and lower case. We have, attempts to spell cute things in the words, in the hex content. And I think the working group needs to say whether we think we should put them in upper or lower case and whether or not we should avoid any of these kind of wordy things there. I think we should have a consistent, probably we should have a consistent case, but I'm agnostic as to whether it's upper or lowercase. Any comments, any preferences?
That Sean says, let's not shout and keep it lower. I think I have a
Yeah.
minor preference for lowercase as well, but I agree that the main thing is that we be consistent.
Okay, so I'm going to do that. I will make it all lowercase, and that was the easiest one. How are we going to do IPv6 link local addresses? So we had, so what are they? I guess probably most people here know this, but I'll say this anyway. They typically start with FE80, a bunch of zeros, and then a 64-bit IID, which is sometimes derived from a layer 2 address. And they're specific to one interface. Those interfaces in often APIs sometimes are named with different types of names, but internally it is the IF index that is used. And essentially we could support it if we could find a place to put one extra integer. So a way that I can think is we could recognize that this is, most cases, is probably relating to a bit to an interface address, even if we're just specifying something. And so the idea is that we would add an additional integer to the end of an interface address. And if necessary, you know, if not really talking about an interface address, we would set the 64 to 128. And then an additional option, since that takes 2 bytes for 128, is we could declare that 0 is the same as 128. And that would save us 1 byte there. We could do other things. The difficulty with the bare address is that it's a bare byte string, and we have used arrays to indicate other kind of criteria, and so we can't just come back to the bare byte string. We need to do something else. Looking for comments on this. Objections. This is stupid and ugly. We're going to have to write some text clarifying that the IF index is system local. This is not suitable for transfer in, you know, I can't put this in my CBOR based FTP protocol and have the index mean anything across the network. On the other hand, if what I'm shipping around is network configuration in some kind of Yang or other type thing, then the indexes make sense locally, and it does make sense that you would talk about interface link local addresses, and you would be able to specify the IF index of them.
Carsten?
Yeah, I think we need to do this a little carefully, because this is something that applies to addresses, but not to prefixes. So I think the cases 1 and 3 actually need to be addressed here, and I'd rather have a clear difference between an address that has a zone identifier on it and an interface definition. So setting something to 128 or 0 doesn't really suit me. Setting it to false or null, that might work.
Oh,
So
okay.
having a 3-entry array where the first entry is the actual byte string, the second entry is either the net mask, or it's null or false or whatever, if no net mask is intended, and the third one would be the zone identifier. That would be the most general thing to do, where a zone identifier can be an integer or a text string.
Okay.
So that's the solution if we agree that we have that problem. So there is already a way to send all this information in Yang, obviously. So this is a different way to send the same information, which is fine. And yes, I've seen systems where I needed to use the zone ID. It's still kind of a special case, but I think using this triple with nulls or false, we can avoid it really becoming a ton of different cases.
Okay, so I like false if there's no
Good.
net mask. And do we're just extending that array by one item. It's either there or it's not.
Right.
What does it mean if it's not a link local address and there's a scope ID? I think the answer is, I don't know. It's actually valid to do that in a socket bind call, but sometimes it's meaningless. So I don't think we should rule that out.
What about multicast addresses? I think
Multicast does need a scope ID. Yeah.
Where the word scope unfortunately means something different.
It needs a zone. Yeah, it needs to be bound to an interface, and then it has a scope, a multicast scope. Yes, which is more confusing. You're right.
Yeah. So I think we don't need to limit this to FE80, to the FE80 case, but we can just provide for that third array element, and then the subnet sticks out like a sore thumb, but that's okay.
All right. So is there any other comments on that proposal? I will write it up this afternoon. I know it's on the telechat tomorrow. I don't know if that'll work, but we'll see. The other issues. What do we do with invalid lengths? This is a question from Ben Kaduk. And I think that's really it. We invoke whatever it is the application thinks to do for an invalid length. Then I don't know what else we would do. Maybe there's some other comments or thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think this should be handled like any invalid tag.
Okay.
So we probably should have a paragraph about tag validity that says what are the things that a tag validator should check.
So that's not up to the application. It's up to some library to validate this.
Well, 8949 leaves this open whether tag validation.
Yeah, it does exactly.
Application or the library, but it still makes sense to fully define tag validation, so you don't have two different libraries that do different things for validation.
Okay, so we need to specify more clearly what is invalid. Then it's invalid
Yes.
for instance, on a an IP address always has to be 128 or 32, and we've said that trailing zeros are okay for the subnet, so those lengths could be different, but and we've said the interface definition is always 128. So the only cases are what if it's not 128 bits, then it's invalid, or if it's not 0 to 128 in the length.
I hope most of this is in the CDDL already. So
I think
the
so too.
validation section could probably just point to the CDDL and maybe add one or two sentences. I don't know what else needs to be said. Not everything, of course, can always be explained in the CDDL.
All right. And Ethernet addresses, people have asked. Okay, so we have changed the text that says that 260 only is deprecated for IP addresses. So if you want to use tag 260 for Ethernet addresses, This document is perfectly happy to support that. I have no particular need to encode them, but maybe others do. I think that we should just remain mute about other things. And there are, of course, also 2-byte Ethernet addresses and 6-byte ones and 8-byte ones, depending on what transport you have. Maybe they're not Ethernet addresses. Maybe they're
MAC addresses.
15.4 MAC addresses. Yeah.
So I like Donald Eastlake's suggestion to do this in, what was it, 7201 bis. There is this document, if you haven't seen it, which contains all kinds of ancient and arcane knowledge about IEEE defined identifiers used in the IETF context. It's a little bit like a book you would check out from the Hogwarts library. I mean, it's really all very, very ancient and stuff you don't normally come into contact with. So I think defining a CBOR tag for MAC addresses in that document would be the right way, because we have all the context. So we know what kinds of MAC addresses we talk about and so on. The only little problem might be that this document is informational, and so the tag definition would be informational, and any standards document that does normative reference to that tag would need a downref. But I think that's a manageable downside.
That was 7201 bis? No.
Let me check this.
7201 is not Ethernet arcane knowledge. So our recommendation is that this document deal with it.
7042. 7042.
Right. Okay, well, that's it from me. That's Donald's document anyway. There you go.
There you go.
So he can go take it and run with it.
Okay, so you think you can get a revision posted for tomorrow's telechat? So perhaps
Yeah, I'll
Eric
get
can-
it done by the end of today.
Good. And then we'll see.
So that may not be ideal for North American IESG members, but I hope I'll reply to. I will certainly reply to all the emails and tell them what we're doing.
Yep.
You know, a little bit after this call.
Okay.
Michael, I've seen you and Carsten have replied to most emails, but Roman hasn't gotten a reply. I don't know if you've seen it. Sometimes,
Roman?
Yes, and it's nothing.
I
It's
mixed.
just an objection comment, and yeah.
Okay, I'll make sure I reply to him. I did combine his comments in with the other some other, because there were repeated comments, so I did reply.
Okay, but that's good
but
enough.
I'll make
with
sure
that's good enough with just answering him, like we're taking care
I'll
of it
just
here.
tell him that we've done that. Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. And I haven't followed the thread with Eric and Donald and who else was in that thread, but
I haven't either, because I haven't read any email yet today, but I will catch up on that.
okay. Yeah, the conversation seemed to have started going in a kind of a side track. It's just sort of not very actionable to this document, but yeah, it's good to be prepared. So
Okay.
yeah, Thank you.
Okay. Ira.
I wanted to point out that in the email, if you haven't seen it today, is a comment last night from Brian Carpenter in the thread about link local and scope with Eric and others that says about the interface index that unfortunately it's actually possible to change the interface ID in Linux, and it's actually true in other Unix-like systems, so Mac OS and elsewhere, which breaks the mapping between IF index and IF name. And I don't know if that matters, but I suggest you may want to look at that comment and respond to Brian.
Okay, I'll respond. I think that the point is, though, is that anyone who's using this kind of thing for, I would say, configuration that persists for longer than a second is going to have to deal with that question anyway.
Right.
Whereas some of the things that drove me originally to define this was that I wanted to be able to pass configuration from, well, a daemon that had discovered a peer on a link local address to another daemon that needed to interact with it. And if there's a rename that happens in the middle, well, then bad things happen and we retry, right? I don't care that much, but
okay.
So I'll reply to it, but I don't think we should change anything in the way we're doing it. People use IF index, I think, at their peril. And I like that Carsten suggested that. Yeah. And we can put a CBOR string in there as well. It's much less compact. And that may be for some people, the correct answer, right?
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And Francesca posted a link to the email thread she was talking about in the chat.
Yeah, that contains also the one mail that you were just talking about, Michael and Ira.
Okay, do we have anything else we need to talk about today?
Well, I wrote a new draft, which you had, I think, about 3 hours chance to look at. So maybe we can have a quick look at that.
Go ahead and share your screen if you like, or just talk about it. Yeah, there we go. Grant screen.
Okay, so this is essentially the content that we should be discussing. We just don't know where that content will go. I just wrote a single draft, so for a while we can discuss it in one piece. But of course, this has dependencies on things that really would probably suggest moving some of this to the place where the dependency is. So basically, we talked about having application-oriented literals in diagnostic notation. And so I essentially wrote a few words that say the notation for byte strings, for encoded byte strings, can be hijacked or extended a little bit because we essentially have a namespace here with the tokens HB32, H32, and B64 taken, but we might want to use all the other names. And this explains how to do this, and also defines a registry where new names can be put up. So the forenames that are taken are described as reserved here because they are really just byte strings, and the other two are the ones that this document defines mostly to have an example. Yeah, that would be an IANA registry. I seem to remember informational documents can have IANA registries, but I never remember the details of that, and it's not written up in a place where I would find it.
Yes, they can.
Thank you. So 8126 is mute about that, which kind of sounds like if it's not forbidden, it should be allowed, but it's nicer if you actually know it's allowed. So we need to define the policy, which is probably some specification required thing, or maybe not. Let's discuss this later. And the actual detailed template, but I think this is pretty straightforward. So let's look at the two examples. The one we really need is the CRI extension. And essentially, we would be able to write something like this in the diagnostic notation. And the diagnostic notation processor would send this through a URI to CRI converter and essentially come up with this. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what we already discussed. There is one ugly thing here, or maybe interesting thing, depending on what your perspective is. The href document defines a conversion from CRI to URI, but not from URI to CRI. So theoretically, that is ambiguous. There might be more than one CRI that can be converted to the same URI. Yeah, I don't have an example for that, but there is some cautionary text here that implementations should favor the simplest variant available. I mean, you could instead of -4, you could write a string containing HTTPS here. So this is trivially true, but it's also trivial what the right answer is. But there may be more complicated cases where we don't have a 100% unique mapping. And that's new because so far diagnostic notation always gave you exactly, not at the encoding level, but at the data model level, gave you exactly what you wrote. So that's the CRI case. And just to have another case here, I took the DT syntax from the Corel document and converted this into an application extension identifier. So you can now write something like DT 1969-0721 and get an epoch-based time, which in this particular example is a negative number. So that's it, and I probably need to polish this some more, but before I do that, I'd like to have a little bit of feedback whether that's the direction we want to take, or whether we want to do this at all to support the Corel thing, or whether we decide there should be no application-specific things in the diagnostic notation. Because yeah, that of course opens the question whether your diagnostic notation processor is able to do the things that my diagnostic notation processor can do. But we kind of opened that when we extended diagnostic notation in 8610, so it's not necessarily a given that all diagnostic notation processors can do the same thing. You will also note the absence of ABNF, which is very unusual for me. If I have any text-based information, I usually have ABNF. But in 8949, we took the position that this is not an interchange format, so we shouldn't try to define it using the same mechanisms we use for interchange formats. Yeah, so if this is your comment, where's the ABNF? Here's your answer. That doesn't mean that you need to agree with that. Of course, we can provide ABNF for this. Okay, any comments?
Everything welcome. Let's do it. Let's not do it. Let's do it differently. Yay, Karsten, thanks. Anything? Everyone is really
Um,
excited. Ira,
Yes, let's do it. Yes, I like what you've done. I'm always nervous about not having at least exemplary ABNF, but if it, it would have to be labeled as this is not normative, this is, for descriptive purposes. But we obviously need the CRI extension and the DT extension, I believe.
So we have one more comment in the chat. So I try to have a more polished version done by the internet draft deadline.
to that. Anything else we need to discuss?
How many interims do we have next meeting?
Sorry, how many what?
Interims.
Oh, yeah, let me check.
We have
Check
one in
what we
2
have.
weeks. That's it, I think.
Got to get my calendar up here. Okay. We have, yes, in 2 weeks, so on the 20th of October, we have one. And that is the last one that's scheduled. Because then we are the Wednesday before IETF. So yeah, I think we're good on that. We can always schedule one for November 3rd if we need the extra time. I'm guessing we don't. We will have a meeting during IETF 112, so we should be good. And then at that point, we'll schedule them for post 112.
Yes. Note that the plenary is going to be on November 3rd.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that. What about November 3rd?
The plenary is going to be November 3rd.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Yes, it is. So
I
I
don't
don't
think
yeah, I don't think we're going to need one on November 3rd. I think we're good. Does anyone think we might? Now, we'll double check on the list whether after the next interim, we'll double check on the list whether there's any material that needs to be discussed between then and the 112 meeting. I think not. Okay, then you all have a half an hour back. 27 minutes, actually, by my clock. Thanks for coming, and thanks for the discussion. See you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Barry. Bye.
Thank you all.
You, bye.